The wind carried a lonely cry across the high desert, a cry that didn't belong to any coyote or bird. It was the sound of fear, raw and desperate, cutting through the night air like a blade. The moon hung low over the red mesas, spilling its pale light over the scrub and dust. A figure on horseback stopped near the ridge, his dark eyes narrowing as he listened again. He knew that sound. It wasn't the cry of an animal. It was a human voice, trembling and small, lost in the wilderness. He was an Apache, a man whose people had lived off that rugged land long before railroads and white settlers carved through it. His horse shifted beneath him, restless at the distant howls that followed. Wolves. The pack was hunting, their cries rising and falling with the cold wind. He didn't think twice. With a soft click of his tongue, he spurred his horse down the ridge toward the sound. The ground blurred beneath the hooves, sagebrush snapping in their wake. He could smell smoke somewhere far behind him, faint traces of a burned wagon or camp. The settlers had been moving through the valley recently. He had seen their tracks earlier that morning: wagon wheels, boot prints, a few hoof marks from tired animals. But he hadn't expected to find any of them, left alive after the storm that swept through the night before. Then he saw her, Small figure huddled near a cluster of rocks. Wrapped in what used to be a blanket, her face streaked with dirt and tears. The wolves were circling closer, their yellow eyes glinting in the moonlight. She couldn't have been more than 9 or 10. Her breath coming in short gasps as she clutched a broken stick like a weapon. He drew his rifle, steady and calm. The first shot cracked the silence, echoing through the canyons. One wolf dropped instantly and the others froze, snarling at the stranger who had interrupted their hunt. The horse stamped the ground, and with another shot the pack broke off, melting back into the dark. The girl didn't move at first. She looked frozen, too afraid to trust what she'd just seen. He dismounted slowly, his moccasins barely making a sound on the dirt. The night air smelled of dust and gunpowder, heavy and sharp. He lowered his rifle and spoke softly, using the few English words he knew. "No hurt. Safe now." She didn't answer. Her lips trembled, and she stared at him as though he were another wild animal ready to pounce. He noticed the faint burn marks on her torn dress and the blood on her hands. Somewhere out there, something terrible had happened. He could read it in her eyes, the kind of pain that didn't come from a simple accident. He offered his hand. The girl hesitated, then reached for it, her small fingers shaking in his rough, calloused palm. Her voice was barely a whisper. "They're gone." He didn't ask who. He didn't need to. The answer was already written across the empty land behind her. He lifted her onto his horse and turned back toward the canyon. The night was deep and cold, and he could feel her trembling against his chest as he rode. Her tiny hands clung to his blanket, as though afraid that letting go would mean falling back into the darkness she had escaped. When they reached his camp, the fire was little more than glowing embers. He added dry wood and coaxed the flames back to life. The girl sat beside it, silent and wide-eyed, her hair tangled and her cheeks streaked with dirt. He gave her water and a piece of dried meat. She ate slowly, not out of hunger, but confusion, as though her body wasn't sure it was safe to trust warmth again. He watched her carefully. She was different from the other settlers he had seen. Her eyes were a light gray, and though they held fear, they also held something else: curiosity, the kind that made her look at the fire, the sky, and even him as if she were trying to understand how the world still existed after everything she'd seen. When she finally spoke, her voice was small but clear. "My mama told me to run. I heard her scream, and then the fire. I just kept running until I couldn't anymore." Her words broke off, and she stared into the flames. He didn't press her for more. The land had its own way of teaching silence, and sometimes the quiet healed better than questions ever could. For days, she stayed with him. He built her a small shelter beside his, made from hides and branches. He taught her how to wash in the stream and find berries that wouldn't make her sick. She began to speak more, not about the past, but about little things, the shapes of clouds, the way his horse's mane looked in the wind, the songs he hummed at night. She asked him what the songs meant. He told her in broken English. They were about journeys and spirits. It's about remembering where you came from and where you were going. She listened closely every time. as if she could feel the story behind the strange words. One morning, she followed him up a hill to watch the sunrise. The desert spread wide below them, golden and still. She tugged at his sleeve and asked quietly, "What's your name?" He hesitated before answering. "Taza," she repeated it carefully, her tongue stumbling a little. "Taza," then she smiled, for the first time since he had found her. Over time, something began to change. The fear that used to shadow her every move started to fade, replaced by a cautious trust. She would run barefoot through the tall grass, laugh when the wind blew her hair into her face, and bring back wildflowers for his fire. Taza didn't say much. He found himself watching her with a quiet protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. He had lost his own family long ago to sickness and war. But he didn't speak of it. The pain had grown old and silent, like a scar that never quite healed. Yet when he saw the girl smiling, he felt something stir in his chest, a memory of what it meant to care again. One evening, as the fire burned low and the night stretched over the canyon, she looked up at him and said softly, "You saved me. I think maybe you're like my papa now." He looked at her, the flicker of the flames reflecting in his dark eyes. He didn't understand all her words, but he understood enough. The feeling behind them reached him more clearly than any language could. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable, but inside, something shifted. The days passed into weeks, and they built a quiet rhythm together. The land became their shared world, a bond between two souls who had both been lost and somehow found one another. But peace in those days never lasted long. One afternoon, while they were gathering wood near the edge of the canyon, Taza spotted fresh tracks in the dirt. Not animal tracks this time, boot prints. Too deep to belong to hunters, too straight to be travelers. Soldiers. He recognized the pattern of their horses, the sharp lines of discipline in their path. They were close. His stomach tightened. The girl noticed his change in expression and asked, "What is it?" He put a finger to his lips, scanning the horizon. In the far distance, a thin line of smoke rose into the sky. The soldiers had been moving through Apache territory for weeks, claiming to keep peace, but leaving ashes in their wake. If they found her with him, they wouldn't see kindness. They'd see a story to twist, a reason to raise their rifles again. He led her quickly back to ward camp, his eyes darting between the ridges. The land was too quiet, the kind of silence that meant danger was waiting. That night, as they sat by the fire, she sensed his worry. She reached for his hand and whispered, "If they come, we can hide. You won't let them take me, right?" Taza looked into the flames, his jaw tight. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Somewhere beyond the hills, faint and distant, a horse neighed and the echo of metal clanged against stone. The girl turned toward the sound, her breath catching. The firelight flickered across her face, and for a brief moment the world seemed to hold its breath with her. The night that had once brought her rescue now carried something else. Entirely an approaching storm she didn't yet understand, and as the wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke and steel, Taz's hand went to his rifle once more. The night felt longer than any before. Taza didn't sleep. He sat by the dying fire, listening to every whisper of wind that moved through the canyons. The girl was curled up under his blanket, her face peaceful for the first time in days. She didn't know the danger that might be walking toward them. He did. He had seen soldiers like these before, men who rode with flags and rules but left behind broken things wherever they passed. To them, he was an enemy, and anyone with him would share that fate. As dawn broke, the desert light came slow and cold. The girl stirred, blinking against the brightness. "Are we going somewhere?" she asked, noticing the way Taza was packing a small bundle. He nodded. "We move. Far." She didn't argue. Maybe she could sense the unease in his tone. They ate quickly jerky and a few berries from the day before, then mounted the horse and rode toward the mountains. The land grew rougher, filled with twisting paths and hidden canyons where only the Apaches knew how to move unseen. Taza kept his eyes on the ridges. The prints from the soldiers were fading behind them. But that didn't mean the danger had passed. By midday, the sun burned hot against their backs. The girl's hair shimmered with dust, her skin turning red from the heat. She held onto him tightly, her small frame pressed against his back as the horse climbed the narrow trail. Taza stopped near a stream that cut through the rock, letting the horse drink while the girl splashed water on her face. She looked around at the vast emptiness. "Is this where you live?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "Home far south. Mountains big, river wide." His English was rough, but the meaning was clear. "Do you have a family there?" she asked, curiosity shining in her eyes. He paused before answering. "Had? Long time ago?" His gaze drifted to the horizon, where the land stretched forever. She didn't ask more. There was something about the way he said it that made her understand that some questions were better left in silence. They traveled for hours, deeper into the land where the red rocks rose high and shadows played tricks on the eyes. Along the way, Taza taught her to recognize the signs of life where the quail hid, how to read the wind, which plants could be eaten. She listened carefully, soaking up every word. For her, it was more than survival. It was a new way of seeing the world. That night, they made camp in a hollow between two cliffs. The air was cooler there, carrying the scent of sage. As the fire crackled, she looked up at the stars. "My mama used to tell me the stars were lamps God lit so the lost ones could find their way home," she said softly. Tata looked at her, then back at the sky. "My people say stars are spirits of those before us. They watch, guide." She smiled faintly. "Maybe both are true," he didn't reply. But there was something in his eyes, an old sadness mixed with quiet respect for her words. In the days that followed, they settled near a hidden valley where the river wound through tall cottonwoods. The girl began to laugh more often, helping him with small tasks, weaving grasses into rough ropes and learning to ride his horse on her own. Sometimes she would hum little tunes from her past, songs her mother might have sung while working or cooking. The sound of her voice softened the emptiness around them, but every now and then Taza would stop and scan the horizon. The soldiers had not returned, yet he could feel the world shifting. He knew his people were scattered, many taken to reservations, others hunted. The land that once belonged to them was now a place of fences and borders. He feared that one day, no matter how deep they hid, trouble would come again. One afternoon, while gathering wood, the girl found a small piece of cloth tangled in the brush. It was faded blue, with a patch of gold thread. "This looks like something from a uniform," she said, showing it to him. Taz's face hardened. He took the cloth, studied it, and tucked it into his belt. "We move again," he said simply. They left before sunset, riding through the canyons in silence. The girl didn't ask why this time. She had learned that when his voice turned quiet and his eyes sharp, it meant danger wasn't far. By nightfall, they reached the edge of a narrow gorge. Across the valley, lights flickered faintly, campfires. The soldiers were there. From their position, they could hear faint laughter, the sound of metal, and the neighing of horses. Taza crouched beside a boulder, motioning for her to stay still. Through the dim light, he counted at least 8 men. They were setting up camp, their rifles stacked neatly by the fire. He watched them for a long time. The girl tugged at his sleeve, whispering, "Are they the same ones?" He nodded slowly. "Yes. Will they hurt us?" His jaw tightened. "They hurt many." She lowered her voice. "Maybe we can tell them you saved me. Maybe they'll listen." Turned to her with a look that silenced her instantly. "They not see like that. To them, Apache is enemy. Always." She stared at him, realizing for the first time what that meant. The man who had saved her, who had given her safety, was hunted simply because of who he was. That night they camped further up the ridge, hidden from sight. Taza didn't light a fire. The cold bit through the dark, but neither of them complained. The girl curled close to him for warmth. In the silence, the faraway sound of a harmonica floated through the air from the soldiers' camp. The tune was soft but hollow, a strange reminder that those men, too, were human in their own way, men following orders. Perhaps just as lost as anyone else, Taza lay awake, thinking of what would happen if they were found. He had lived his life by the rhythm of survival, but now he had someone else to protect. That made the stakes different. It wasn't just his life on the line anymore. By morning, the soldiers had moved on, but the tracks were fresh. Taza knew they were heading east toward the same direction he planned to travel. He had once thought of taking the girl to an Apache camp deep in the mountains, where a few families still lived free, hidden from the army. Now he wasn't sure it was possible. The land began to change again as they moved. The cliffs gave way to rolling hills, and the scent of pine replaced the dry desert air. Birds called from the trees, and the girl began to collect small feathers she found along the trail. She tied them to a string and wore them around her wrist. "For luck," she said with a grin. Taza only nodded, though part of him wished luck were enough to keep danger away. Later that day, they reached an abandoned cabin near the tree line. The wood was old and gray, the roof sagging, but still standing. It looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. "We stay here for now," he said, inspecting the place. Inside, the girl found a few broken dishes and a rusted lantern. She lit it carefully, smiling as the small flame flickered to life. "Feels like a home," she said. He didn't correct her. Maybe she was right. For the first time in weeks, they had walls around them and a roof over their heads. That night, as rain pattered softly on the roof, Taza sat near the window watching the dark woods beyond. His instincts wouldn't let him rest. The girl slept soundly beside the fire, her small hand clutching the blanket. In the quiet, he thought of his past, of the raids, the battles, and the people he had lost. Life had taken much from him, yet it had also given him this strange, fragile bond that he never expected. Before dawn, he stepped outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and cool. He followed the narrow stream that ran behind the cabin. As he bent down to drink, he noticed something in the Muda-fresh boot print. Too large to be his, too recent to be from before. He rose slowly, scanning the woods. The forest was silent, but he felt it again, that same heavy stillness before danger strikes. Back inside, the girl was waking up. She rubbed her eyes and smiled, unaware of what he had seen. "Morning, Taza," she said cheerfully. He gave a short nod. "Eat quick. We go soon," she frowned. Again. He didn't answer. He only reached for his rifle, loading it carefully. The sound made her stop talking. Outside, a crow called from the distance, its cry echoing through the valley like a warning. Taza glanced toward the tree line, his face unreadable. Somewhere beyond the mist, a shadow moved between the pines. He placed a steady hand on the girl's shoulder and whispered, "Stay close." And as the first rays of morning light broke through the clouds, the sound of a snapping twig came from the woods behind them. Taza froze, his hand instinctively tightening around the rifle. The forest, once quiet, now felt alive with unseen movement. The girl followed his gaze, her small body trembling as she clutched the edge of his coat. The morning light filtered weakly through the trees, and every rustle of leaves sounded like a footstep. A second sound came closer, this time a soft clank of metal against stone. Taza moved slowly, signaling her to stay behind him. He stepped toward the sound, keeping low, eyes sharp. Then a man's voice cut through the still air. "Hold your fire, Indian." From behind a tree stepped a soldier, rifle raised but not aimed. His uniform was worn, dust covering the brass buttons. He looked tired, maybe even uncertain, but his stance was steady. A moment later, 2 more soldiers appeared behind him, their weapons ready. The girl gasped softly. Taza didn't move, his expression unreadable. He could tell these men weren't part of the large patrol. They looked separated, like scouts sent ahead. The first man studied him for a long time before speaking again. "We're not here to start trouble," he said. "We're looking for a missing child. A settler's girl from the last wagon train that burned out near the flats." Taz's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. The soldier's gaze shifted to the girl behind him, and for a heartbeat, everything went still. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "That's her," he said softly. The girl stepped back, clutching Taz's arm. "Don't let them take me," she whispered. The soldier lowered his gun slightly, his voice gentler now. "You're safe, sweetheart. We've been searching for you for weeks." "Hey!" Taza didn't move. He could see the truth behind the man's calm tone. The soldiers didn't understand. They saw a frightened child and an Apache man, and no matter what she said, they would decide the story themselves. "She stays," Taza said finally, his voice low but firm. The soldier frowned. "You don't have a say in that. The girl belongs with her people." "She has no people," Taza replied. The man's expression hardened. "You don't get to decide that." He took a cautious step forward, but Taza raised the rifle slightly not to fire, just enough to remind them he wouldn't let her go without a fight. The tension hung heavy in the air. For a moment, it seemed the smallest mistake would set the world ablaze. Before anything could happen, a shout came from deeper in the woods. "Lieutenant!" Another soldier emerged, panting. "We found Track's horse and 2 sets of prints heading north. The rest of the patrols close behind." The lieutenant cursed under his breath. He glanced between Taza and the girl, then made a choice. "We'll come back," he said, voice clipped. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." They backed away, rifle still raised, until the trees swallowed them again. Taza waited until the sounds of boots faded completely before lowering his weapon. His pulse was steady, but his mind raced. The girl looked up at him, eyes wide. "They're coming back, aren't they?" "Yes," he said simply. She swallowed hard. "What will we do?" He turned toward the horse and began to pack quickly. "We move again, north." She didn't argue. The fear that had been fading from her since he rescued her now returned, sharper than ever. She followed his every move, her face pale and quiet. By nightfall, they reached a narrow valley where the mountains curved like walls around them. The air smelled of pine and rain, and the river below ran fast and cold. It was a place few would find without knowing the land. Taza set up a small camp near a rocky overhang, hidden from sight. The girl sat close to the fire, her eyes still wide with worry. "Why do they think I'm lost?" she asked softly. "I'm not lost. I found you." Taza looked at her, his face calm but unreadable. "They not understand. They see Apache, they think bad. But you saved me," she said. "You're the only one who did." He nodded slowly. "World not always see truth." The fire crackled between them. For the first time, the girl began to understand the kind of world she was living in. A world where kindness and danger wore the same face. Depending on who told the story later that night? As she slept, Taza climbed higher up the ridge to keep watch. The moonlight bathed the land in silver, and he could see far down the valley. In the distance, a faint light flickered campfires. The soldiers were closer than he'd hoped. He sat there, silent and still, thinking about what lay ahead. Taking her north was risky, but heading south meant crossing open plains, crawling with patrols. His people might be out there, hidden deep in the mountains, but he couldn't be sure they'd still welcome him after all this time. The world had changed, and even his own kin might question why he carried a white child in his arms. The next day brought rain. It came in sheets, turning the ground to mud and washing away Tracks a small blessing. As they took shelter beneath the rock ledge, the girl asked questions to fill the quiet. "Were you always alone?" she asked. Tatea shook his head. "Once had family, wife, son. What happened to them?" He stared into the rain. "Soldiers came. Said we must leave land. My people fight, many die. My family with them." The girl's eyes filled with sympathy. "I'm sorry," didn't answer. Words couldn't change the past. But her simple kindness, her way of listening without judgment, touched something inside him that had long gone silent. As the rain eased, they moved again. The forest thinned, opening into a meadow filled with tall grass. It seemed peaceful, but Taz's instincts warned him to be cautious. He dismounted and motioned for her to stay low while he scouted ahead. He crouched behind a cluster of rocks, scanning the landscape. Across the field near the tree line, something glinted in the sunlight, a piece of metal. Then came the faint crack of a branch underfoot. Someone was there. He returned quickly. "We go around," he whispered, but it was too late. From the trees ahead, 2 soldiers stepped out, rifles raised. Behind them, others emerged, spreading wide. The lieutenant was among them. His expression was hard, but not cruel. "You should have come with us when you had the chance," he said. The girl clung to Taz's arm. "Please," she begged, "don't hurt him." The lieutenant's eyes softened for a brief moment. "He's not the one we came for," he said. "But the law says that child belongs with her kind. It's not my decision." Taza lifted his rifle slightly, his voice steady. "She is my family now." Soldiers tensed. The lieutenant hesitated, torn between duty and reason. He could see the truth in their faces, the bond that had grown between them, something more than circumstance. But he also knew orders left little room for mercy. Before anyone could act, a sudden shout came from the ridge behind them. Arrows sliced through the air, striking the ground near the soldiers' feet. Chaos erupted. Horses neighed, men scattered for cover. Taza turned sharply, recognizing the war cries echoing through the valley. Apache warriors. The lieutenant shouted commands, trying to hold his men together. Taza pulled the girl down behind a rock, shielding her as bullets and arrows cut through the air. The ground shook with the noise. Smoke rose, and for a moment, the world was nothing but thunder and fire. When the fighting eased, the soldiers began to retreat, dragging their wounded. The Apache raiders disappeared back into the trees as quickly as they had come. The valley fell quiet again, but the silence felt dangerous. Taza stood slowly, scanning the tree line. A tall warrior stepped out, painted for battle, his bow still in hand. He spoke in Apache, his voice firm but questioning. Taza replied quickly, explaining who he was and why he was there. The warrior's eyes moved to the girl. He frowned. "Why bring her?" Taza answered simply, "Because she's alone, like I was." The warrior studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "We talk later. Soldiers will return." He followed the warriors deeper into the forest, where the trees grew thick and shadows ran deep. The girl stayed close to Taza, her hand gripping as tightly. When they reached the hidden camp, smoke from small fires curled into the sky, and the smell of roasted meat hung in the air. The other Apaches stared at them, some with curiosity, others with suspicion. An elder woman approached, her hair streaked with gray. She spoke softly to Taza, asking about the child. He told her what had happened, from the wolves to the soldiers. The woman looked at the girl and placed a hand gently on her head. "The spirits must have chosen this path," she said quietly, "but the path will not be easy." That night, as the fires burned low, the girl sat beside Taza, her head resting on his shoulder. "Will they find us again?" she asked. "Maybe," he said, "but we keep moving. Always moving." Outside the circle of firelight, the forest whispered in the wind. The soldiers were still out there somewhere, searching. The Apaches watched from the shadows, unsure whether to trust the man who had returned with a white child. And Taza, though strong and silent, felt the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on him, somewhere deep in his chest. He knew the fight was far from over. The next morning, mist hung heavy over the valley, wrapping the Apache camp in silence. The air was cold and sharp, carrying the smell of damp earth and wood smoke. Taza woke early, the old instinct of a man who had learned never to sleep too deeply. He checked the ridge lines, the faint trails of smoke beyond the trees, and listened. The soldiers would not give up. He knew that much. The battle in the valley would only slow them down, not stop them. The girl stirred beside the fire, rubbing her eyes. "Is it morning?" she asked sleepily. He nodded. "We move soon." The Apache elder, the gray-haired woman from the night before, approached quietly. "The warriors are leaving," she said to Taza, in their language. "They'll head north, away from the patrols. You should come with them before the soldiers return." Taza looked toward the mountains. The idea of safety tempted him, but he knew the girl couldn't endure another long journey through the wilderness. She was pale, thinner than before, though she tried not to show her exhaustion. He turned back to the elder. "She cannot travel far now. I will stay for a few days." The woman frowned. "Then you must hide well. The soldiers search for her. And for you?" He nodded solemnly. He already knew. That day passed quietly. The warriors left before sunset, fading into the distant ridges. The girl helped gather berries and fill water skins, her small hands working quickly. She tried to act brave, but Taza could see the fear behind her eyes. Every sound from the woods made her glance toward him for reassurance. As night fell, thunder rumbled far to the west. Dark clouds rolled over the peaks, covering the stars. Taza built a small fire inside a rocky hollow to keep them dry. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavy and cold. They sat close, listening to the storm. The girl looked up at him, her face glowing faintly from the firelight. "Do you think they'll ever stop looking for me?" He hesitated before answering. "Maybe one day, but not soon." She hugged her knees, staring into the flames. "I don't remember much from before. Only my mama's voice and the sound of the fire that night. Sometimes I think if I try hard enough, I'll remember more, but it hurts when I do." He nodded slowly. "Some things better to forget." The rain grew louder, echoing through the cliffs like distant drums. Taza felt uneasy. The storm asked sounds to well footsteps, hooves, danger. He kept his rifle close and his senses sharp. When the thunder finally eased, another sound reached him faintly through the downpour. Horses, not many, but enough to make his pulse quicken. He rose, motioning for the girl to stay silent. Crawling to the edge of the hollow, he peered into the darkness. Lightning flashed, revealing figures moving along the valley floor, 3 riders, their shapes faint against the rain. They carried rifles, and their movements were cautious, deliberate. "Soldiers." Tava returned to the girl. "We go now," he whispered. She blinked, confused. "In the rain?" "Yes." "Move fast. Quiet." They slipped into the storm, following a narrow trail that wound up toward the higher rocks. The ground was slick, and the girl stumbled often, but he caught her every time. Behind them, the glow of lanterns flickered through the trees. Voices carried faintly through the rain orders shouted. Horses snorting. By dawn, they reached an old hunting cave high above the valley. The air inside was cool and smelled of damp stone. From there, Taza could see the soldiers' camp below. They had set up near the stream, smoke rising from their fire. He counted at least 6 of them. The lieutenant was among them. His familiar voice carried faintly up the ridge. The girl crouched beside him, her breath shaky. "They're close," she whispered. He nodded. "We stay hidden." They spent the day in silence. The rain stopped, leaving the air heavy and still. The soldiers searched the woods, moving in small groups, their voices echoing faintly. Taza watched them from the shadows, every muscle in his body tense, as the sun dipped low. The girl reached into her pocket and pulled out something smaller, feather tied to a string. "You said your people believe spirits guide us," she said softly. "Maybe this one will keep us safe." She tied the string gently around his wrist. He looked down at it, surprised, then gave a small nod. "Spirits watch. Maybe they listen too." That night, the soldiers moved closer. Taza could hear them talking as they climbed the ridge. The lieutenant's voice was sharp but calm. "The tracks lead this way. They can't be far." Taza loaded his rifle silently. The girl's eyes widened. "Will they find us?" she whispered. "Not if we move first." Guided her deeper into the cave, toward a narrow crack that led to a hidden path behind the cliffs. The passage was tight and dark, but it opened onto a steep trail that wound down toward the river. They moved carefully, the sound of boots echoing faintly above them. Halfway down, a rock gave way under the girl's foot, tumbling down the slope with a loud clatter. Voices shouted from above. "Over there?" Taza grabbed her hand. "Run." They raced down the trail, the wind howling around them. Gunfire cracked behind them, bullets striking rock and earth. The girl stumbled but kept moving, tears mixing with rain and dust on her face. Taza turned and fired once, the echo rolling through the canyon. The shot sent the soldiers diving for cover, buying them precious seconds. They reached the river's edge, the water rushing fast from the storm. Taza looked at the current, then at the girl. "Hold tight," he said. Without hesitation, he pulled her into the water. The cold hit them like a wall, but the current carried them away from the ridge. They drifted downstream, hidden beneath the cover of night, till the shouts faded behind them. When they finally reached calmer water, Taza helped her to shore. She was shivering, her lips pale but alive. He built a small fire using dry wood from under a rock ledge and wrapped her in his blanket. She leaned against him, exhausted. "Will they stop now?" she asked weakly. "No," he said. "They will follow the river. We keep moving." By morning, the rain clouds cleared, revealing a wide stretch of wilderness ahead. The land was open now, harder to hide in. They followed the river north, moving slowly, always watching the horizon. Taz's mind raced through plans: find food, find shelter. Maybe reach the mountains before the soldiers caught their trail again. As the day warmed, the girl's strength returned a little. She tried to smile, though her voice was faint. "You think your people will help us?" "Maybe," he said. "Some still free in the highlands. If we reach them, they can hide us." But deep down, he wasn't sure. The Apaches, who still roamed the mountains, had become cautious, wary of strangers. If they saw him with a white child, they might see it as betrayal. Yet he had no other choice. They camped that evening near a grove of juniper trees. The air was quiet, but Taza couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He kept the fire small, his rifle across his knees. The girl lay beside him, her head resting on his arm. Just before dawn, the stillness broke. A distant sound hoofbeats echoed through the valley. Then came the cry of a hawk, sharp and sudden. It wasn't natural. It was a signal. Taza rose instantly, scanning the horizon. In the faint light, he saw them 3 riders moving fast along the river bank. Soldiers. They had found the trail. Again, he shook the girl gently. "Up," he whispered. "We ride now." She didn't argue. Within moments, they were on the horse, galloping toward the mountains. The wind tore at their faces as the landscape rushed by. Behind them, the soldiers' shouts grew louder. The chase lasted for hours. Dust and sunlight burned together, the ground thundering beneath hooves. Taza led them through rocky passes, across streams, and into dense groves, trying to lose their trail. The girl clung to him, eyes squeezed shut, whispering prayers under her breath. By late afternoon, they reached a steep rise leading toward a hidden Canyuna place Taza remembered from years ago. It was narrow and difficult to cross, but if they made it, they could vanish completely. The horse stumbled on the rocks, but pressed forward, driven by Taz's steady hand. The soldiers were close now. He could hear their rifles clicking as they prepared to fire. One bullet struck the ground near them, throwing up a spray of dust. Another whizzed past his shoulder. "Hold on," he shouted. The canyon walls rose around them, tall and jagged. The path narrowed to a ledge barely wide enough for the horse. Behind them, the soldiers dismounted, following on foot. The echo of their boots bounced off the stone. The girl looked back, her voice trembling. "They're still coming." "I know." Taza urged the horse faster, but the ledge began to crumble beneath the weight. Small rocks tumbled into the ravine below, clattering against the cliffs. The horse snorted and reared, nearly throwing them both. He steadied it with one hand, gripping the reins tightly. "Almost there," he muttered. The sound of gunfire came again, louder now. A bullet grazed the rock near his head, sending shards flying. He pulled the girl close, shielding her. The air was filled with the echo of shots and the distant roar of the river below. They reached the end of the ledge, where the path curved sharply around a massive boulder. Beyond it lay a narrow opening, a passage that led deep into the mountains. But before they could enter, a figure stepped out from the shadows, rifle in hand. It was the lieutenant. His uniform was torn, his face streaked with dirt and rain, but his eyes burned with determination. "It's over, Apache," he called out, his voice echoing through the canyon. "You can't run forever." Taza stopped, his rifle raised but his expression calm. The girl's hand tightened on his arm. The wind howled through the cliffs, carrying the scent of gunpowder and dust. Both men stood locked in silence, each knowing the next moment could decide everything: the girl's fate, his own, and the fragile bond that had grown between them. Then, somewhere behind the lieutenant, another rifle cocked. A shadow moved on the ridge above, unseen by both men. The world held its breath. The wind tore through the canyon, carrying dust and the faint smell of rain. For a moment, no one moved. The lieutenant's eyes stayed locked on Taz's, his rifle steady, his breathing shallow. The girl stood between them, trembling, clutching the side of Taz's coat. Then a single shot echoed from the ridge above, sharp and sudden. The lieutenant staggered, his rifle slipping from his hands as he dropped to one knee. His men shouted somewhere behind him, their voices faint and confused. Taza spun toward the ridge. Standing there, outlined against the sky, was an Apache warrior. The man lowered his rifle and gave a small nod, a silent sign of recognition. Taza understood. Word had spread, and his people had come. The soldiers below scattered, unsure of how many waited above them. Within minutes, the sound of retreating horses filled the air, fading into the distance until only silence remained. The lieutenant lay on the ground, clutching his shoulder where the bullet had grazed him. His face was pale, but he was alive. Taza approached slowly, keeping his rifle lowered. The man looked up at him, breathing hard. "You could finish this," the lieutenant said quietly. "But you won't, will you?" Taza shook his head. "No more killing." The lieutenant gave a faint, bitter smile. "Then you're wiser than most." He tried to rise but stumbled. Taza hesitated, then reached out a hand to help him. The man took it reluctantly, surprised by the gesture. For a brief moment, there was no enemy between them, just two men worn down by loss, each carrying the weight of choices they could never undo. When the lieutenant was steady on his feet, he looked at the girl. "She's all you have now?" "She's under my care," Taza said. The lieutenant nodded slowly. "Then take her and go. I'll tell my men we lost you in the storm." Taza studied him, unsure if he could trust the words, but something in the man's tone felt honest. He gave a short nod in return. The lieutenant turned away, gripping his wounded arm, and disappeared down the canyon path. Taza watched until the sound of boots faded. Then he looked at the girl, who stood quietly, tears glistening in her eyes. "Is it over?" she asked. He looked toward the mountains, where the clouds were breaking apart, streaks of light falling through the mist. "For now," he said, "but we must keep moving." They rode deeper into the high country, where the air grew cooler and the pine trees thickened. The Apache who had fired the saving shot met them halfway along the trail. He was young, fierce-eyed, and carried the mark of Taz's old band. "Our chief sent me," he said. "He heard your name. He says you can return if you wish." Taza glanced at the girl beside him. Her face was thin and weary, but her eyes were clear. He thought of the long road behind them, the soldiers, the storms, the nights of silence broken only by fear. He turned back to the warrior. "Tell your chief, I come not for myself, but for her. She needs a home." The man nodded, understanding. "You both have one now." By sunset, they reached a hidden valley deep within the mountains. Smoke rose from small fires among the rocks, and the sound of laughter drifted on the wind. The Apache village was alive again, though smaller than before, rebuilt from loss and memory. When Taza and the girl entered, the people came out to meet them, faces lit with surprise and relief. Some remembered Taza from years past. Others only knew his name. An elder woman approached, her gray hair tied with beads. "You've come home, Taza," she said softly. "The mountains have missed you." He nodded respectfully. "I bring someone who needs your care." The girl stepped forward, nervous but brave. The woman smiled kindly and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You are safe here, child." That night, a fire burned in the center of the camp. The people gathered around it, sharing food and stories. The girl sat between two young women who taught her words in their language. And for the first time in many moons, she laughed. Taza sat apart, watching quietly. The mountains seemed gentler now, the air warmer, as if the land itself had been waiting for peace to return. Later, the elder woman sat beside him. "You have done much for a child not of your blood," she said. He nodded. "She was lost. I could not leave her." The woman looked toward the girl. "Perhaps the spirits brought her to you for a reason. Sometimes the lost ones remind us who we are." Taza thought of the lieutenant's eyes, the weary look of a man bound by duty and regret. He thought of the girl's courage, the way she had clung to life despite everything. Maybe the elder was right. Maybe saving her had saved something in him too. As weeks passed, the girl learned quickly. She gathered herbs with the women, helped with weaving, and even began to speak bits of Apache. She called Taza brother, though she still kept the small feather she had tied around his wrist. He often found her sitting near the stream, humming softly, as if remembering a melody from another life. Sometimes Taza would climb the ridge overlooking the valley. From there, he could see far into the horizon the winding river, the distant plains, the open world that had once been his home. The soldiers never came again. The lieutenant, true to his word, must have let the trail die one morning. As mist rose from the valley, the girl brought him a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a small carving of a hawk she had made from river stone. "It's for you," she said shyly. "You always watch the sky." He smiled faintly. "Hawk sees what others do not." "You have good eyes," she grinned. "You taught me that." Years slipped quietly through the valley. The girl grew stronger, taller, her face brighter with life. She helped plant crops in the summer, rode horses with the young warriors, and carried a small knife Taza had given her for protection. The people came to accept her as one of their own. Taza aged, but his spirit stayed steady. He became a guide and a storyteller for the younger ones, teaching them the old ways of the land, how to move without leaving tracks, how to listen for the heartbeat of the earth. Yet whenever he spoke of the past, of the war and the chases and the nights filled with fear, he never mentioned the soldiers by name. Some stories were meant to fade with time. One evening, as the sun melted behind the peaks, the girl, now nearly grown, sat beside him by the fire. "Do you ever miss the world beyond the mountains?" she asked. He looked toward the distant plains, glowing gold under the fading light. "Sometimes, but peace is not found by going back. It is made where we choose to stand." She nodded, thoughtful. "Do you think they still remember us out there?" "Maybe," he said. "But what matters is that we remember who we are." The fire crackled between them, throwing sparks into the twilight. The sounds of laughter and music drifted through the camp. The girl rested her head on his shoulder, her eyes half-dashed closed, as darkness deepened. Taza looked once more at the feather still tied around his wrist, worn and faded now. It reminded him of everything they had survived: the storms, the chase, the long nights when hope seemed far away. He understood now that strength was not just in the fight, but in the endurance to keep going, to protect what was fragile and true. Years later, travelers would speak of an Apache camp hidden deep in the mountains, where a girl with pale hair and a man with dark, steady eyes lived side by side, bound not by blood, but by something greater. They said the man had once been a warrior, and the girl a lost child. But both had become symbols of quiet survival, of peace forged in hardship. In the end, the land itself carried their story, the whisper of wind through the pines, the ripple of the river below, and the cry of a hawk circling high above. The mountains, once filled with fear and war, now held the memory of two souls who chose compassion over vengeance, and in doing so, found the freedom they had been searching for all along. And as the sun set one final time over the ridges, the world seemed still, at peace, as if even the earth knew their journey had reached its home. Top of form, bottom of form.